What's up, everybody? Just as the sun has risen, so should your mind and your heart. Above all things, above everything, no matter what you experience, no matter what you go through, no matter how hard your situation may be, no matter how challenging an experience you're having, above all things, have courage. Have courage to rise your mind and your heart. I want to welcome you all to day number 2 in our journey together. You see, this is another 30-day journey that we're going to be exploring together. And I anticipate that you're going to be transformed by the end of this journey. This anticipation is truly, I'm expressing this anticipation because I already have been transformed. And I have not even began to walk as many days as we're going to be walking together. So I'm excited to see how this journey is going to hopefully impact you just as much as it's already impacted me. You see, this journey that we're going to be exploring together is going to be around the theme: problems are roads to solution and progress. Problems are roads to solutions and progress. So you may be asking, well, why are we going to spend so many days talking about our problems? And that's a good question to ask. I mean, if I were you, I would probably ask the same thing. Why do I want to continue to look at my problems every single day? I mean, if I were you and I was sitting in the same position, I might even ask myself, is it worth looking at my problems every single day? I mean, I'm trying to avoid them. I'm trying to go around them. I'm trying to not have any. I'm doing the best to live. Why do I want to look at problems every single day? And I'm glad you asked that question. I'm extremely glad you asked that question. I'm excited you're thinking of that. The reason why we're going to be exploring problems is because we're not only looking at problems, we're looking through your problems, because your problems are roads. Yeah. The problem that you're experiencing right now, literally all it is a road to your solution and your progress. You see, oftentimes we perceive our problems as something that we don't want. And before we jump into this conversation, it's important that we have a working definition of problem. And we're going to be utilizing this working definition throughout this journey. So I want to go ahead and give the definition now. The definition of problem is a matter or situation regarded as unwelcomed or harmful and needing to be dealt with and overcome. So let me explain it one more time. A problem is considered a matter or situation regarded as unwelcome or harmful, needed to be dealt with and overcome. Think of the problem that you're facing. Think of that situation that you're experiencing that's unwelcomed in your life. Think of that situation that you're going through that's creating harm to you, harm mentally, harm emotionally, possibly harm physically to you. And I also want you to consider that situation, and I want you to explore your inside, your heart. Explore how you feel in your heart. Typically, when you're thinking of the problem you're having, you're wanting to deal with it right now. Oftentimes when people have problems, it's challenging to push them aside because they always seem so present. And depending on the perception of the problem will typically determine how healthy you are. What do I mean by that? Well, we understand that perception has to do with the way we think about things. So if you're constantly thinking about something that's a problem over and over again, then that's what you're going to see inside of you, your mind, your imaginations. If you think about something long enough, you're going to start to imagine it. And you may be wondering, well, why is that an issue? I have to think about my problem. I think it's important to think about my problem because when I think about my problem, I know what to avoid. No, let me explain this to you. When you think of a problem over and over and over again, and that's all you're doing is just thinking about it, thinking about how harmful it is to you, thinking about why you don't want it in your life, thinking about how it needs to be dealt with right now, but you don't seem to have the solutions. What ends up happening is this. Your mind, as it begins to think, starts to visualize. Yeah, that mind you have in your head is a powerful tool. It can create images. And not only does it start to visualize it, but your mind starts to create what you're perceiving it to be. So if it's an issue, your mind is starting to create an issue. And the beauty of the mind is that it is creative. And what could end up happening is sometimes your imagination can be greater than your reality. Sometimes your imagination can be greater than your reality. And before I go further in the conversation, I just want to be transparent with you and give you all a brief glimpse into what I mean by that from a personal standpoint. You see, recently I explored what I perceive to be a threat. Well, that's probably not a good word. What I perceive to be a risk. You see, for the majority part of my life, when I left the Chicagoland area and went to college and explored and just left family and moved to college, and I went on with my life for so many years, I thought about how challenging my childhood was. And year after year after year after year, I told myself the way I grew up was rough. I told myself that the people that helped me grow up were harming me. You see, I told myself so many stories for so long that they became greater than my reality. Not only did that happen, but then my heart started to believe the stories that I was telling myself. So you may be asking, what does this have to do with me? Why do I need to hear your story about what your narrative was about growing up and why you believed your narrative to be greater than your reality? Well, this is why. I've recently had the opportunity to come back home. And in this exploration and this journey of coming back home, I got an opportunity to see my past. And let me tell you something. There's a difference between what you imagine and what's real. There is a big difference between what you imagine and what's real. You see, far too often we think of things so long and we create a visual in our mind and it exceeds the reality. And that's a problem. And that's a problem. And it's important for us to take this time to explore this mythology that a man, as a man thinketh in his heart, or as a man thinks, so he is. You see, the Bible speaks to that very clearly, and and that type of approach of looking at a situation is what you believe in your heart to be true is typically how you see your life and what you become. So I don't want to lose you guys and get too far off track, but I really wanted to explore with you and give you a sneak peek into my personal life and why I'm diving into this 30-day journey, because it's extremely helpful to really take a self-examination of what's happening within you first. That's the first priority, to examine yourself, to take time to think about the thoughts you're thinking, right? You know, if you've been thinking about a problem, if you've been thinking about a problem, then this journey may be good for you to join. You know, if you've been feeling problems in your life, if you've been feeling problems in your life and they're reoccurring problems, this may be a journey for you to join. I don't know your situation, nor do I know your life, and I'm not trying to pretend to know. I'm just simply saying that I'm going to reflect from a space, and if it's something that's transcending into your life, I pray that it's used in a transformational way, that you can then take what you think and turn your situation or turn your problem into a solution. I'll share the end of my personal story and the result or the solution I discovered at the end of this segment. So, as we are exploring problems, today our conversation is going to be specifically on the topic of hate. And hate is a tremendous thing that people experience. You see, hate is defined as a feeling of intense or passionate dislike for someone or something. And so as we explore hate, we need to not only look at hate, but we need to see what is the solutions that come from hate. What is the progress that comes from hate? And then we also have to further understand this. When it comes to hate, hate is a feeling and it's not an emotion. Hate is a feeling. You feel hate for something. And it can derive an emotion of anger, frustration, disappointment, disgust. The results of hate are impactful to our lives, especially if you're not paying attention. Constant exposure to hate, constant exposure to that feeling of hating someone or something. And what it does is it forces your body to go into a survival mode. So now you go from your natural state to a survival mode. So you're not truly yourself. You're going into this hyper extensive part of yourself. So when you hate something, you leave your center. You leave that space of peace. You leave that place where you and God commune. If you're religious and you're spiritual, this is where you and God commune in this place of peace. This is where that commune comes from. And if you're not spiritual and you want to really go into that conversation about how hate can impact you, well, there's a center part of you that most people recognize. Some people call it meditation, this centerness where all things, there's no harm and there's no hate. There's nothing there. It's just a sense of being one with self. So when you have a feeling of hate, it takes you outside of yourself to this hyper extensive place, and then it clicks your body into survival mode. So you may be asking, well, why is that an issue if my body goes into survival mode? How does that currently impact me? Why do I need to be aware if I'm going into survival mode? Well, it's because what happens is when you go into survival mode, that can result into anxiety. It can result into insomnia and depression. Anxiety, your heart racing, do-do, 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 do-do. And you feel this sense of unease. That's not a good feeling. You can't think straight when you're facing anxiety. You typically don't feel comfortable with yourself or a situation when you're facing anxiety. Insomnia, lack of sleep. Sleep is healthy. Sleep is necessary. And so, like I said, hate is a feeling, and it can create this response to have your body go right into a survival mode. And once your body goes into this sense of surviving or this hyper extensive state, then it can result into anxiety, insomnia, and depression. And we also have to understand hate is so prevalent in the culture we live in. Even in the United States right now, there's 917 organized hate groups. Currently right now, there is 917 organized hate groups. We're not talking about 917 people, groups. Think about that. So why do people hate? Why do we experience hate? What is it about hate that comes into our life? Why do you hate someone? Why do you hate yourself? Why do you hate your relationship? Why do you hate the way you look? Why do you hate other people? Why do you hate other races? Why do people hate? I can't imagine people want to stay in a hyper extensive place. I can't imagine people want to feel this thing we call hate. I can't imagine this is something comfortable to live with. I can't imagine that people don't see hate as a problem. But unfortunately, it's not about what I can imagine. It's about what I see and what's real. Every day we have the opportunity to go on our devices and see that there's hate all around. Hate is not anything that is new. It's been around for such a long period of time. We have seen hate from generation to generation being passed down. We see people in slavery because they hate a particular race. We see people being killed because they hate a particular person. We've seen marriages get ripped apart and torn right apart because people hate one another. We see businesses, we see cultures, we see economy, we see so many things be destroyed because of this feeling we call hate. And so we have to really explore first the roots of something in order to understand it. You see, the first thing we have to explore is that hate comes from a few things. And one of the things hate comes from is fear of another. Fear of, well, we'll call it the other. That's a place of hate. That's where hate derives from. That's one space that hate derives from. You see, when we feel threatened or perceived by an outsider, we instinctively turn towards our in-group or to those we can identify with. Let me say that one more time. Hate comes from a particular space of fears of other people. And when you feel threatened by a perceived outsider, someone who's not like you, someone who doesn't look like you, someone who doesn't talk like you, someone who doesn't hang with the same people you hang with, someone who's not affiliated with the same group you're affiliated with. Come on now, we can go into different segments into this thing. We can look at the politics. There's different groups into politics where we see hate prevalent. We see gangs, right? There's different gangs that are out there that there's hate that is prevalent. Even with families, right? We see families, different families, that there's hate prevalent. A space that hate comes from, again, is from the fear of others. And again, we have to understand it's a perceived thing. It's in the mind. It's a perceived outsider. So the question presumingly would be, why do we perceive that others are on the outside? That's something to explore. Why do we perceive that others are on the outside? You see, when you take a look at this perception of others, again, we're talking about groups, other people, of the races, things that are not like you. And innately, what happens from a psychological standpoint, we instinctively, meaning it's part of our nature, to turn away from something that's not like us. It's part of the nature. It's part of what your upbringing. It's part of where you come from, that if something is not like you, you're going to turn away from. You're going to shy away from. You're not going to really feel comfortable around it. It's not going to be something that you really want to associate yourself with. It's a natural thing to turn away from something you're not like. But does that give it reason? Especially if it's a cause of hate. It makes me wonder, is it worth getting to know someone that's not like you? It makes me wonder, is it worth understanding a group of people that you've never got the chance to understand? You see, what happens is when something is not like you, or if there's a separation between you and that group, fear tends to come in. And when fear invades you, because it does, fear is not part of who you are. You see, when fear invades you, what it does is it holds you hostage to a belief. And typically the belief is that you're not good enough, that you don't belong. And then it incorporates this thing called shame, where you feel worthless and you feel like you're not good enough. And what happens is it goes to the next space where hate is found. You see, the next space in which hate is found is fear of ourself. You see, again, we got done talking about fear of others, right? Judging other people and not being alike, and having this innate thing to turn to people that are look like us, that act like us, right? But now we're moving into this other space where hate comes from, and it's the fear of ourselves. You see, the things we hate about others are that which is we fear of ourselves. So let me slow down and say that one more time. The things we hate about others are that which we fear within ourselves. You know, I hate the way that person looks at me. It disgusts me that they're even looking at me right now. It makes me feel uncomfortable that they're even staring at me. Is it really their look, or is it how you feel in that moment about yourself? You see, this is typically called projecting. And projecting happens, again, when there's something in us that we're not comfortable with, when there's something in us that we're not okay with. What happens is, again, our body goes into this self-survival mode, this hyperextensive mode where we have to protect our flaw. Because if you're exposed, if they knew you didn't know the things you think you're supposed to know, if they knew how uncomfortable you felt about yourself, if they knew you didn't like the way you looked at yourself. You see, it's a tremendous thing to examine the inside of a man. You see, we oftentimes see people, we see the way they act, we see the way they talk, but we rarely know who they are. You see, who a man is what's happening inside of his heart. And if you have trouble examining your own heart and protecting your own flaw, you can generate hate. You see, what ends up happening is this: we develop this method as a means to survive, for fear that any badness in us puts us at an imagined, keep in mind, in the mind, an imagined risk of being rejected or being let alone. Hate. I can't stand this person. That's the problem. But again, this journey, we're not focusing on the problem. We're looking at the problem as a road to a solution and progress. That is growth. Hate. So the last space that hate derives from is lack of self-compassion. Lack of self-compassion. You see, the antidote to hate is compassion. I want to make sure you get that. We talked about hate quite a bit so far. We talked about how the fear of others, or the fear of being not like someone, or someone not being like us, can inspire hate. We talked about the fear of ourselves, not being comfortable, not feeling whole enough, not feeling good enough. We protect ourselves and we go into this hyperextensive space of survival mode, and we block others and we hate others because that's how we protect ourselves of fear of being exposed. And now we're saying there's an antidote. There's a solution to this hate. So the solution is compassion. The antidote to hate is compassion. And that word compassion derives from the meaning to suffer with. To suffer with. You see, it's important for us to understand for others as well as ourselves. We need to have compassion for other people as well as ourselves. So you may be asking, how can I have compassion when I have a problem right now? I just need to figure out how to fix this problem. I need to figure out how to get rid of this problem. I need to figure out how to separate myself from this problem. The mind just keeps working and working and working. And then that narrative you're telling yourself becomes an imagination so real that it's greater than your reality. Your problem is a road to your solution. Without your problem, you may not have realized that you have the capacity to have compassion for yourself. Suffer with yourself. Don't avoid yourself. Don't reject yourself. Don't neglect yourself. Suffer with yourself. Understand what you're going through. Have patience for yourself. You see, no one's perfect. We all struggle. We all have opportunities to grow. Have patience and compassion for yourself. That is an antidote to this thing we call hate. In addition to that, have compassion for others. Have compassion for your brother, your sister. Have compassion for other cultures. Have compassion for other races. Have compassion for other people. Have compassion. Share that. Suffer with. Understand that person. Empathize. That's the antidote to hate. And you may be wondering, it just still doesn't make sense. My problem may not go away. You see, you may be saying, I have so much hate that I don't know how to change. You may be saying right now, I can't see change happening in my life. You may be saying, Trevor, you don't understand this person. They're going to cause harm to me simply by the way they look at me. You may be saying, I don't understand how this race doesn't understand me. And let me be clear with that. I know we all struggle, and I know that we all go through things. I'm not trying to say that your struggle is greater or lesser than mine. I'm just saying I understand we all struggle. I'm not even trying to say that my race is greater or lesser than yours. I'm just simply trying to let you know we all have different races. I'm not even trying to say that my gender is better than yours. You see, I understand we all experience different things. But what I am saying is we share a common thing. We oftentimes all have problems. We oftentimes struggle to take a step outside of what we're used to. I understand that you may struggle with getting to know someone else because of the fear that of you may expose the flaws in you. You see, my brothers and my sisters, I understand that sometimes on the inside you're crying, but on the outside you're standing strong. You see, my brothers and sisters, I understand that some nights you have a hard time going to sleep because your mind is telling you you're not good enough. Your mind is telling you you aren't going to make it. Your mind is telling you things are going to fail. Your mind is constantly moving and giving you narratives that make you want to give up and give out. You see, my brothers and sisters, I understand what you're experiencing because I experienced the same thing. But I would tell you this also, my brothers and my sisters, that your problems are roads to solution. So you may be asking me, well, what is the solution to my inner fear? Well, my solution that I've discovered is, because I go through pain, heartache, and trouble, I sometimes realize that my education isn't going to keep me sane. I sometimes realize that my family can't always be there when I call. I sometimes realize that I, within myself, don't have all the answers. But in the middle of the night, in that midnight hour, I oftentimes hear a voice that says, my son, I will never leave you or forsake you. You see, I heard this voice that said, my son, I love you and you are not alone. I've also heard this voice say, my son, look to the hills which cometh your strength. Your strength cometh from the Lord. I oftentimes hear a voice that says, no weapons formed against you shall prosper. You see, my brothers and sisters, the solution that I found is in the Lord. I found a solution that is so transcending, that has generated, inspired, and created clarity in my heart. And I call him my Savior. I call him my God. And so I may not have all the answers, but in the stillness of night, he speaks to me. And he is not a race. He is not a gender. He is not a group. He is God. He is all things. He is ahead and he is not the tail. He's the beginning and he's the end. He's all things. And I want to share this with you. Your problems are not the end. Your problems are not the end of you. Your problems are just the beginning of your solution for you to be set free and delivered. And it starts in your mind. As a man thinketh, so he is. So I'm going to tell you this. Starting today, I'm going to start thinking things that are for me and not against me. I'm going to start thinking that I will be the lender and not the borrower. I'm going to start thinking that I am greater than he that is in me. Greater is he that is in me than he that is in the world. I'm going to start thinking that no weapons formed against me shall prosper. I'm going to start thinking that he that walketh with me. Let me go to Psalms 23 with you. The Lord is my shepherd. I'm going to start thinking that the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He maketh me lie down. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me by still waters. Because if it was up to me, I still would be having problems. I still would be having issues with other people because I have issues with myself. The true love comes in the compassion you have for yourself. And true compassion comes from God and God alone. He inspires compassion. He has given us a way to suffer with ourselves. He's given us that love, that inward love, to be able to have patience, because he's promised us that he will never leave us as we examine ourselves or forsake us. So I hope, I pray, I know for a fact that your problems are roads that leads to solutions and progress. And we're not finished with the conversation of hate. We're going to extend this conversation for a couple of days. Tomorrow we're going to talk a little bit about the prodigal son. And we're going to pull out some principles there that are going to show us more solutions that are found in the roads which we call problems. And just as I mentioned earlier, this is day number 2 of the journey. And just as the sun has risen, because the sun has risen, so should your mind and your heart, and above all things, have courage.